You pull into a gas station somewhere in Europe, Asia, or South America and notice something strange. The car at the next pump isn't a Tesla. It isn't a Toyota. In fact, it belongs to a company that, just a few years ago, most people outside China barely talked about. Yet somehow, that company is now selling millions of vehicles, expanding across continents, and forcing some of the biggest names in the auto industry to pay attention. The surprising part isn't how many cars it's selling. The surprising part is the decision that made all of it possible. Because while most automakers spent decades building supply chains that stretched across the world, one company chose a completely different path. A path that many believed was too expensive, too risky, and almost impossible to scale. But today, that gamble may be changing the future of transportation. To understand why, you have to go back to a time when the company wasn't known for cars at all. It was known for batteries. While global automakers competed over engines, transmissions, and vehicle platforms, this company quietly became obsessed with something most consumers never think about: manufacturing control, not marketing, not branding, control. The leadership believed that whoever controlled the most critical parts of a vehicle would eventually control the future of the industry itself. At first, that idea sounded ambitious, maybe even unrealistic. After all, modern cars are built using thousands of components sourced from hundreds of suppliers, spread across multiple countries. Almost nobody makes everything themselves anymore. In fact, the entire industry is built around outsourcing. But this company saw outsourcing as a weakness, hiding behind efficiency, so it started making more parts internally. Then more, then even more. What began as a battery business slowly evolved into something much larger. Motors were brought in-house. Electronics followed. Then transmissions. Then complete powertrain systems. Year after year, the company kept expanding its control over the production process until something remarkable happened. It reached a point where it could build nearly every major component of its vehicles itself. That decision wouldn't seem important to most people at the time. But years later, it would become one of the biggest competitive advantages in the automotive world. The effects weren't immediately obvious. Customers buying cars rarely think about supply chains. They care about price, reliability, and performance. Yet behind the scenes, a new kind of manufacturing empire was taking shape. Massive factories began appearing across China. Not ordinary factories, but facilities so large they looked more like industrial cities. Inside them, raw materials entered one side of the production chain, and finished vehicles emerged from the other. Batteries, motors, electronics, engines, software systems, everything was connected. Everything was coordinated. Everything moved with a level of speed that surprised even industry experts. And this is where the story starts to get interesting, because building factories is one thing. Building a manufacturing system capable of producing millions of vehicles is something entirely different inside these facilities. Robots operate around the clock. Conveyor systems move continuously. Automated inspection stations scan parts with extraordinary precision. In some areas, human workers oversee entire groups of machines rather than performing the tasks themselves. The goal isn't simply speed, it's consistency. Every process is measured, monitored, and optimized. Every second saved becomes an advantage when you're trying to build millions of vehicles every year. But none of that explains why customers started choosing these vehicles in such large numbers. That answer was hiding inside the company's hybrid technology. People assume a hybrid vehicle works in a simple way. A gasoline engine does most of the work, while an electric motor provides assistance when needed. That's how many traditional systems operate. But this company approached the problem differently. Instead of treating electricity as a helper, it treated electricity as the star of the show. The gasoline engine became the supporting actor. At first glance, that sounds like a minor engineering choice. In reality, it changed the entire driving experience. Drivers could enjoy the smooth acceleration and quiet operation associated with electric vehicles while still having the flexibility of gasoline when longer distances were required. For many consumers, it felt like getting the benefits of both worlds without fully committing to either one. But this only matters once you see what happened next, as fuel prices fluctuated and concerns about charging infrastructure continued in many regions. More drivers began looking for alternatives. Pure electric vehicles appealed to some buyers. Traditional gasoline vehicles appealed to others. Yet a growing group of consumers wanted something in the middle, something practical, something flexible, something that removed uncertainty rather than adding it suddenly. The company's strategy began making sense. The vertically integrated manufacturing system wasn't just reducing costs, it was allowing new technology to reach customers faster. Since batteries, motors, software, and powertrains were developed under the same corporate umbrella, engineers could optimize how everything worked together. Instead of separate suppliers solving separate problems, entire teams could focus on improving the complete system. The result wasn't one breakthrough. It was thousands of small improvements accumulating over time. And that's when competitors started paying closer attention. Some automakers had spent decades refining traditional hybrid systems. Others focused almost entirely on battery electric vehicles. Meanwhile, this company occupied a position somewhere between those two worlds. It wasn't abandoning electrification. It wasn't abandoning practical range. It was building a bridge between the present and the future. As sales increased, expansion followed. New facilities appeared outside China. Production partnerships grew. Manufacturing footprints spread into new markets. Yet the most advanced technology continued flowing from the enormous industrial network that had been quietly expanding for years. What once looked like an overly ambitious manufacturing strategy was now powering one of the fastest-growing automotive companies in the world, and perhaps the most fascinating part is that the story still isn't finished, because the same company that once focused on batteries is now investing heavily in software, artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing, and next-generation vehicle platforms. Every year, factories become more automated, production becomes more efficient, systems become more connected. The gap between vehicle design and vehicle manufacturing continues shrinking. The question is no longer whether this strategy works. Millions of vehicles on roads around the world have already answered that. The real question is what happens next. If controlling the entire ecosystem helped transform a battery company into a global automotive powerhouse, what happens when that ecosystem becomes even larger, even smarter, and even more efficient? Because maybe the biggest story here isn't about one company at all. Maybe it's about a shift happening across the entire industry. A shift that could determine how the next generation of vehicles is designed, built, and sold. And if that's true, then the factories producing today's vehicles may actually be building something much bigger than cars. They may be building the blueprint for the future itself by now. Executives across the automotive industry had begun asking a question that would have sounded absurd just a decade earlier. How did a company that started with batteries become one of the biggest threats to some of the most established car brands on Earth? The answer wasn't hiding in a single vehicle. It wasn't hiding in a marketing campaign. It was hiding inside a manufacturing philosophy that most companies had spent years moving away from. For decades, the automotive world became increasingly specialized. One supplier focused on engines, another specialized in transmissions. Someone else built batteries, another company developed software. On paper, it made sense. Each supplier became an expert in its field. Costs stayed manageable. Risks were spread across the supply chain, but there was a downside nobody fully appreciated. Until global disruptions began exposing weaknesses everywhere. A delayed shipment in one country could stop production thousands of miles away. A shortage of a single component could halt an entire assembly line. A disruption affecting batteries could delay vehicle launches for months. Suddenly, the efficiency of outsourcing started looking fragile, and this is where the company's earlier decisions started paying off. Because while competitors scrambled to secure parts, negotiate contracts, and manage shortages, this company already controlled many of the critical systems itself. It wasn't completely immune to global challenges, but it had more flexibility than most of its rivals. That flexibility translated into something customers could actually see. More vehicles reached dealerships, more production targets were met, more markets received new models, and perhaps most importantly, prices remained competitive. But there was another reason demand continued rising. The vehicles themselves were solving a problem that millions of drivers faced every day. Consider someone living in a city apartment without easy access to home charging. They might like the idea of an electric vehicle, but charging infrastructure still feels uncertain. Now, imagine someone who regularly drives long distances for work. They want lower fuel costs, but they don't want to spend time planning charging stops during every trip.